Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, January the 23rd, 2025. Today there is a sextile aspect between Mars and Uranus, and I want to look at this aspect. I want to consider what it might mean, and in the process I'll be looking at some examples of people who have Mars sextile Uranus in their horoscopes. And I also want to consider a few events that took place at the time of this aspect. But before I look at Mars sextile Uranus, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for today, which is Thursday, January the 25th. And if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, then feel free to subscribe. It does make a difference to the channel. So here is the picture of today, the horoscope for noon, January the 23rd, set for New York. And the moon is still in Scorpio. There it is, New York time. Moon at 24:11 of the sign. Now, moon last half of Scorpio. In many respects, the last half of Scorpio is less difficult than the first half, because when the moon is moving through the first half of Scorpio, not only is it fallen, but it's also in the via combusta, and in the via combusta there can be a certain lack of stability, and things can just happen which we hadn't planned on. And moon moving through the last half of Scorpio, things aren't so crazy. And we also have a few aspects going on. We've got the moon in Scorpio making a trine to Mars, and making a trine to Saturn, and trine to Venus, and perhaps a trine to Neptune. So there's a lot of water now, with the moon, Mars, Saturn, Venus, all in water signs. So that does put the emphasis on the emotional side of things, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, we have a grand trine. So you can see moon trine Mars, and moon trine Saturn, moon trine Venus. So it may not be an exact grand trine, but we can say that we have a watery grand trine. And so when you've got a grand trine, you've got the idea of things moving quickly, there being a certain lack of resistance. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the situation. The grand trine in water can be about responding quickly to things. There's no delay. I suppose it's like thermometers. A couple of days ago I took out this digital thermometer, and I wanted to know what the temperature was outside. So I put this thing outside, and it seemed to take about 10 minutes to get to the real temperature. It started at 18 degrees centigrade and took ages to get to 4 degrees centigrade. Now, a grand trine in water would not take 20 minutes to display the temperature. It would be fairly immediate, because the water responds quickly, almost instantly, to what's happening out there. And so, in a positive sense, we can respond quickly to what's happening. We can understand what's going on very quickly. But there is a danger that we respond too quickly, and we might sort of get destabilized by this. I mean, it's not that there's going to necessarily be anything dramatic, but it just can be over emotional. And so if emotions are changing quickly, we must accept the situation and go with the flow, run with the tide, and not try too hard to resist what is happening. And the moon is making not just a trine to Mars, it's also making an opposition to Uranus. It's making a sextile to that's sextile to Mercury. It's quite tight, that, and so some of us may be actually struggling to actually work out what's going on and trying to verbalize it all. And that could be hard work, trying to verbalize something that functions on a broadly emotional level. It can be difficult, and it can be annoying, because one of the aspects we have today, not involving the moon, is, well, the moon is tied up with it, but we do have Mercury opposition Mars. So I talked about Mercury opposition Mars yesterday, and today Mercury opposition Mars is exact. And so Mercury in Capricorn wants to be able to make sense of things, but it's opposition Mars in Cancer. And so that can represent a certain amount of tension, even a little bit of anger, as we try to verbalize it all, we try to think things through. And yeah, it can actually be very frustrating, this Mercury opposition Mars, and we do have to be slightly careful what we say. And the moon is connected with it, because the moon is sextile Mars, and the moon is trine Mars. So we really have to use our emotions as far as is possible to work out not just what's going on, but what is the best approach. And that means understanding the environment, being able to read the room. That really does matter, and we don't want to get too annoyed about it, and we don't want to create a sense of drama, even crisis. And this leads to the aspect between Mars and Uranus. Now, I will be going into this Mars-Uranus sextile in greater detail at the end of the video, but Mars sextile Uranus, we get the feeling of successful use of our energy. Mars sextile Uranus, because we see sextile as being a fortunate aspect. I mean, that's a general view of sextiles in astrology, but I don't think sextiles are always fortunate. And this sextile, involving Mars and Uranus, can just be about things happening, getting angry. It could be quite explosive. And all the sextile tells us is that there is a connection between Mars and Uranus. Okay, it's not as dramatic as a square or an opposition, but it does matter. And this sextile between Mars and Uranus is tied in with Mercury, because we've got Mercury trine Uranus, Mercury trine Uranus, Mercury opposition Mars, Uranus sextile Mars. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and there is a certain sixness with what's happening, because sextile is a number connected with 6, and 6 sort of combines the numbers 2 and 3, and the number 2 is about polarity, two things being opposite one another, two things struggling to make sense of one another. And then the 3 is about something that's easy, connected with the trine. So when you put 2 and 3 together and you get 6, you get something which requires a little bit of effort, but not too much effort. And that's perhaps the nature of a sextile, and why a sextile is different from a trine. A trine is just completely easy. The energy just flows. With a sextile, there's a certain amount of resistance, and perhaps enough resistance to stop it getting out of control. And this Mars sextile Uranus is possibly made stronger by the fact that Mars is conjunct the fixed star Pollux. So Mars was conjunct Pollux relatively recently, because Mars went through Cancer, stationed, what was it, in early Leo, and then returned to that point where it was conjunct Pollux. And Pollux in astrology is a somewhat angry influence. I'll read you what Vivian Robson says about Pollux. And he says about Pollux, so Pollux is it's in the constellation of Gemini, of the constellation of the twins. That's it, Beta Geminorum, which logically would be the second brightest star in the constellation of Gemini, and it represents Pollux, son of Jupiter and Leda, and the immortal one of the twins, famous for his skill in boxing. And according to Ptolemy, it is the nature of Mars, and it gives a subtle, crafty, spirited, brave, audacious, cruel and rash nature, a love of boxing, dignified malevolence. I like that, dignified malevolence. I was not going to be totally open about how unpleasant one is. One's going to be a bit subtle about it, and it's connected with poison. So be careful what you drink, what you eat. And with Mars conjunct Pollux, violent, murderer or murdered, high position but final ruin, violent death by suffocation, drowning or assassination, especially if the moon be there also. So that gives you the idea that Pollux is quite a combative influence. It's certainly brave, but it can get itself into trouble. And so Mars in Cancer, retrograde, conjunct Pollux, may be a problem. And we may have to watch out for overdoing it, being too brave, and also perhaps we need to consider our motives. And with Mars sextile Uranus, that might give us an idea that a concept that this Mars sextile Uranus may not be an entirely fortunate aspect, but I'll be considering that later in the video. So that's the picture set for New York. So quickly look at how things are in terms of Sydney, Australia. Just a reminder, people watch this video all over the world, I suppose. I'm flattering myself to some extent, but here it is. Here's the Sydney picture. The moon is at 16 Scorpio. So the moon is earlier in the sign Scorpio than in Sydney. And it's moving out of the Via Combustor. So whether you're in Australia or the Americas, there's still a sort of a late Scorpio feel to this chart. Some of the aspects are not there yet. So if you're in Australia, perhaps the most important aspect is Moon trine Saturn, Moon trine Venus. That Moon trine Uranus may not be quite such a significant influence. So Moon trine Saturn, Moon trine Venus, that looks quite good for relationships and getting relationships off the ground, or if there had been recent issues in relationships, perhaps finding a way to sort them out. But I don't think there's a huge difference in terms of the experience of those of you in Australia and those of you in the Americas. And then there is the heliocentric view, where we put the sun at the center of the solar system. So what we have heliocentrically is we continue to have Mars trine Neptune. And, with Mars trine Neptune, it's important that we consider how we exert our energy, and we shouldn't be in too much of a hurry, which could be difficult because there is Mars sextile Uranus geocentrically. So the geocentric and heliocentric picture is slightly different. Now, I do think the geocentric chart is more important than the heliocentric chart, at least in terms of our daily experiences. The heliocentric picture is a little more cosmic, and with Mars trine Neptune, it's indicating that there may be some value in pursuing things of a spiritual nature, because the cosmos might be ready to reveal its secrets. And if we put energy into spiritual pursuits, we might at some level be rewarded. And additionally, we've got Mercury square Neptune. So we have Mercury, Mars and Neptune in some kind of configuration. There is Mercury making a quincunx to Mars and Mercury making a square to Saturn. So, that is interesting, because geocentrically, we've got Mercury opposition Mars. Heliocentrically, we've got Mercury quincunx Mars. So, whichever way you look at it, Mercury and Mars are connected. And so, with Mercury and Mars, as I've already suggested, it can be about verbal anger. There are things we want to say, and we want to say these things with a certain amount of power and impact, and we don't want to get ignored. But Mercury quincunx Mars, there may be a difficulty about how we get this message over without looking stupid or dangerous or ill-informed. So don't just blurt things out. And also, Mercury is square Neptune. So Mercury square Neptune, there's a danger that we get confused. We have Mars trine Neptune, which is nice, provided we don't take it too seriously. We can have vague ideas, maybe of a spiritual nature, but we don't want to regard these ideas as necessarily being the final truth. That would be, potentially dangerous. And Mercury square Neptune, that does indicate that there are certain things that we do find confusing. And just because something seems obvious, we shouldn't necessarily take it at face value, and we just should consider the possibility that we have deceived ourselves. And in fact, we have a T-square, because Mercury is opposition Venus and Neptune is on the T. So Mercury opposition Venus is about trying to make sense of who we are, and most importantly, what we're good at. Because Mercury Venus as a pair is a very talented pair, can be related to art and entrepreneurialism, but it's all a bit of a struggle, because these two planets are opposition each other, and with Neptune squaring both, in a positive sense, Neptune may be suggesting that we kind of let go and we don't take things too seriously, and we try to work out where the universe is taking us. So that T-square, Mercury, involving Neptune, Mercury and Venus, it is dynamic, and the best way to deal with it is to deal with it at a fairly spiritual cosmic level. If we try to deal with that T-square on a down to earth material level, we try to actually make material things happen in the real world, then it could get a bit messy, because we're dealing with a high level energy here and we're trying to make it work at a low level, and that's just not going to happen. So keep things at that spiritual level today if you possibly can, and that's especially the case if you're trying to do something enormous, do something huge. It might be better if you just get a broader perspective on it than to feel that you actually have to make things happen right now. But it's going to be difficult to stand still. With geocentrically, that Mars sextile Uranus may encourage us to really move forward with things. It might make us impulsive, and it depends on the situation. Maybe it's okay to be impulsive, but I'll consider that when I look at the 12 signs. So Let me now move away from the heliocentric view. I said enough about it, and consider today, which is Thursday, January 25th, 2025, from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts. Aries. Aries, you continue to feel that things are a little complicated. You really do want to take action. You're champing at the bit, but you know that few things are simple, and that it might be better to just wait. But you can't wait forever, and some Arians will feel that they actually have to do something, that there simply is no choice. And one of the things that motivates you is a sextile aspect between Mars and Uranus. So Mars making that sextile to Uranus is a force that is, it's very exciting, and you feel that things aren't as good as they should be, and if you could just take action, take the initiative, that would make all the difference. Now, there's nothing wrong with taking the initiative. There's nothing wrong with doing something that is dramatic and unexpected, but you have to do it in the right way. And this is a time, Mars is retrograde, Mars is going through Cancer. It is a time when you need to make sure that you don't do anything that destabilizes you or undermines your core security. So if you do have an impulse to do something, then do think it through. It might seem easy and might seem straightforward. Mars sextile Uranus is often seen as a fortunate aspect, but it's not quite as easy as it looks. And with the sextile, it should be a combination of ease and effort. I know that sounds contradictory, but you need to put a little bit of effort into it. If something is completely easy and there's absolutely no resistance, it's not going to work. And that means, Aries, don't take the easy route. Take the long route. The long route might sound boring, might sound a waste of time. You're an Aries, you like action, but the long route is the stable route. It does give you security, and it gives you time. It gives you time to work out what is happening, because Aries, it's just so important that you don't jump to conclusions. And you could jump to conclusions, and once you've jumped to conclusions, you can make things happen very quickly, and you can move forward very, very fast. But you might move forward so fast based on a few false assumptions that you end up stranded, and you don't want to be stranded. And so by taking a route that is slower and more considered, you will, I think, be making things a lot easier for yourself. So, don't be in too much of a hurry. And this applies also to what you say, because it's not just that Mars makes a sextile to Uranus. We also have Mercury making an opposition aspect to Mars. So, in fact, Mars, Mercury, and Uranus are all bound together in a very tight formation. You've got an opposition between Mercury and Mars, and then you've got Uranus making the sextile and the trine to that opposition. And you could say that Uranus represents a solution. Something is really bothering you. Something is driving you crazy. You want something to happen, and your mind won't stop. And so with Uranus, you're thinking, oh, this is the answer. This is what I need to do. And that's going to solve the whole problem. You're probably right. But you don't want to solve that problem in a hurry, because it's a time when you're going to find that the problem reveals itself slowly, and it's just more multifaceted, and if that's the right word, or multidimensional might be a better word. It's got more dimensions than you realize to begin with, and so just give yourself time. Don't expect everything to sort of reveal itself immediately. And also, the moon is about to move into Sagittarius, and I think when the moon moves into Sagittarius, which will be tomorrow, you'll have much greater perspective. Today, I don't think that you have a full perspective, perhaps because part of you is looking at things in a uncharacteristically introspective way, and you're seeing things in terms of yourself and your emotions, and that's not a very good place to be if you're trying to conduct large-scale initiatives. But when the moon goes into Sagittarius, there'll be a sense of space, and you'll get a broader vision of the whole thing. Taurus, the moon continues to move through Scorpio, your opposite sign, and it makes a trine to Venus and a trine to Saturn, and in fact it's making a trine to Mars. And so we've got sort of a grand trine going with that moon in Scorpio. And from a relationship perspective, I would regard that as being pretty useful. You do have a chance to get on with people and to understand them, and you may be quite open-minded. At least you can be open-minded. I mean, the moon is in Scorpio, that is true, and the moon is in a fixed sign, but I don't think that directly impacts you in terms of how you're relating to things. So I think you can be quite open to whatever is going on, open to other people, and I do think that you can certainly benefit from them with that moon making the trine to Saturn, trine to Venus, and the trine to Mars, because Venus is your ruler. So with moon trine Venus, that gives you a fluency and an ability to just understand what's happening. And it's important that you don't have any view. You don't want to start with a particular view which is very rigid, because you might see things that you hadn't realized existed. You might start to understand people in a new way, and if possible, you should do as much listening as possible. Just listen. It's not a time when you have to really impose yourself on people. I mean, that would be unnecessary, and it kind of would be a waste, because if you have a particular view and you impose that view onto others, that's the end of it. There can be no more progress. But if, on the other hand, you give people a chance to explain themselves, then you start to understand something new, and it's something which I believe you can very much benefit from. And Mars represents other people, and Mars, it's not just that the moon is making a trine to Mars. Mars is making a sextile to Uranus, and so that Mars sextile Uranus can be about people who are dynamic and interesting, who they have something to say, and they may be able to take the initiative in a way that you find interesting. So you don't actually have to feel responsible. Perhaps you should be letting other people make the moves. That way you could say it's not you taking the risk. You're letting other people have a go. You're letting other people take most of the risk, because they seem to know what they're doing. I mean, they may not know what they're doing. I mean, Mars sextile Uranus is an aspect that is somewhat two-edged. I mean, it is dynamic, it is exciting, but it is Mars and Uranus. And Mars and Uranus can be troublesome, and Uranus can get Mars into trouble. But you're not Mars. You're Venus in this situation. So do try to understand what other people have got to offer. And I think that you're going to realize that there are a lot of people out there who've got things to offer, and there's no need to be tied to any one person, any one group of people. There is a lot of social variety out there if you want to look for it, and if you look for people who are on your wavelength, I think that your search will be successful. But again, you've got to be open-minded. It's not a time to be imposing your will onto anyone. It's not about that. And you should be able to take advantage of the fact that Venus is in Pisces. Venus is exalted in Pisces, and Moon in Scorpio trine Venus. It just does make you more easygoing than usual, and so people are prepared to respond to you and share whatever's on their mind, and they are prepared to show you what is possible through their own actions. And if someone else's actions go wrong, which would be unfortunate, I don't think that you'll necessarily have to deal with the consequences. But that doesn't mean you should let people make mistakes. I mean, you don't want to, of course, hold people back, but at the same time, if you really feel, with Mars sextile Uranus, that someone is getting themselves into trouble, which could happen, because Mars sextile Uranus can be a dangerous influence, then, of course, you have some responsibility to express your reservations. And another thing about this Mars sextile Uranus, Uranus has been in Taurus for some time now, and of course next year this year, Uranus starts moving out of Taurus and into Gemini, and it's a slow process. Uranus goes direct into Gemini, then it goes retrograde out of Gemini, so it takes a bit of time to leave the sign. But with Uranus in Taurus, it has been a time where hopefully you have been able to understand what makes you different, and what your unique contribution actually is. And it's certainly not about conformity, Uranus moving through Taurus. And with Mars making a sextile to Uranus, it just could be that through your interactions with other people, you can get a sense of what makes you unique. And it could even be Mars sextile Uranus that you're encouraged to do something which is different, which just breaks your normal routine, but at the same time is an indicator of the future. So if today you find yourself doing something that you've never done before, or talking to people who seem to be very different from you, but it's that originality of experience that you should be looking for. And I do think that some of the people around you, or just maybe the situations you come across, will encourage that originality of experience, and that will be a sign that you're finally understanding the challenges of Uranus, the planet of revolution, moving through your sign. Gemini you feel that you do want to be in control. You're aware that there's a lot going on. And a lot of the stuff going on, you don't fully understand. It may be just happening at a level that you can't really work with. And that may connect with the fact that we've got a lot of planets in water signs. We've got Moon, Mars, Venus, Saturn in water signs, and also Neptune, and the North Node. And with all of these planets in water signs, it just may strike you as being a little bit too emotional for your liking, and you may be aware of other people and their feelings and how people are expressing their feelings, and it just may not feel entirely comfortable, and it could be a bit unsettling. I don't think that it need be a problem, but you just have to be aware that it's a situation where you may feel that you're rather like a fish out of water, except the reverse. You kind of don't want to be in the water. You want to be on land or working in a level of ideas rather than emotion. But it is an emotional day, and that means that you have to accept that and take things as slowly as possible. It's not a day for being in a hurry. Other people might be in a hurry, but if you are in a hurry, it's just not going to work, and your mind is not going to be able to move that quickly. So I would suggest, Gemini, that you do take it slowly. You avail yourself of the fact that there is a sextile between the Moon and Mercury. So the Moon in Scorpio is sextile Mercury in Capricorn, and it's a pleasant aspect that allows you to understand what is happening, but in a slow way. To begin with, you might not understand something, and even if you don't understand something, it's important not to panic, not to overreact. And you could overreact because Mercury is making an opposition to Mars. It was making an opposition to Mars yesterday. It's still making an opposition to Mars. Today is when that opposition is exact, and there's just a danger that you become aware of something and you panic, or you think it's really significant when maybe it's not quite as significant as it looks. That Mercury opposition Mars might be related to money. So Mercury opposition Mars could be about getting some financial news or realizing something of a financial nature and overreacting. So if you hear something surprising or even shocking that relates to money or relates to your money, don't overreact. It may not be as serious or as important as it sounds. And the Moon is making a trine to Mars. It's making a sextile to Mercury. So that Moon in Scorpio is actually stabilizing things. And I think that Moon in Scorpio is working in your favor. It is slowing things down. Yeah, Moon in Scorpio might be an emotional placement, but Scorpio is a fixed sign. It allows you to take your time to understand, what is happening. So your first reaction, Gemini, is not necessarily going to be appropriate, because I think it could be an overreaction. And if you make the effort to understand what's happening, then things will be much, much clearer. And from your perspective, what you can do is just make sure that everything is in order. There are some things that you have control over, and what you can do is make sure that your part of the world is organized, is in order. There might be chaos out there, but if your patch of dirt is in order, then you're going to be in a position where you can protect yourself from the surrounding chaos. And when you get pieces of news, information, you're not going to overreact. And this information could take many forms. I think it could well be of a financial nature, because that Mercury-Mars opposition is across the finance axis of your chart. So that may be something to look for. But it's just very important that you don't overcomplicate things, and it's very likely that whatever you hear, it's not as bad, not as serious as it sounds, or I suppose not as exciting as it sounds. But who wants excitement? I don't think right now Geminis are particularly keen on getting excitement. Now, so far I've perhaps been a little bit negative, but there is a positive side to the day. If you take a serious and disciplined approach, I think that you have a good understanding of your responsibilities. Gemini perhaps has a certain reputation for being a little bit irresponsible, in the sense of being inconsistent, getting involved in one thing, getting bored of it, moving to something else. But today, you are, I think, more responsible than usual. And if you're working, then if you have a job or a business, then that responsibility can really work in your favor, because you will be probably more organized than most other people, and more in command of the facts, and better able to understand what's happening. And this is especially the case if you don't overreact, if you don't panic. I mean, other people might be panicking, but if you just get a perspective on things, and you try to ask yourself, what is really going on, I think that will really be appreciated. And a calm approach where you don't get overwhelmed by what's going on emotionally, then you should be fine. And just remember, Gemini, emotions usually are not your strong suit. So you can be aware of a heavily emotional atmosphere. And I think it is a fairly emotional day for everyone across the 12 signs. There's a lot of emotion flying around. But you don't have to be part of it. You can, to an extent, split yourself off from it. But that doesn't mean to say you're not treating those emotions seriously. They are serious. They could impact you, but you don't have to be part of it. So a little bit of separation can definitely work in your best interests. Cancer. There is arguably a grand trine in water signs today. And this grand trine, because it's in water signs, is fairly emotional, and people are being impacted by it. And some people may just be overwhelmed by it. They may just not know what's happening, and they may feel that they're kind of out of control. But not you, Cancer. This grand trine works in your favor. It does give you a lot of strength. And I would have said, if you want to think in terms of star ratings, probably today is a 4 or a 5-star day, at least in a relative sense. So, of all the 12 signs, I think you have a good understanding of what's going on. You have perhaps the best understanding of what's happening, because it's a heavily emotional environment, and Cancerians have a good understanding of emotional realities, and you're going to understand what's going on without really having to think about it, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? If you're a Cancerian, you don't have to slow things down by being overly logical. You just get it pretty quickly. And also, Cancer, it should be a day where you can enjoy yourself. Things will run smoothly, and if there's something you want to do, something you really enjoy doing, I think you'll have the opportunity. And once you start, it may actually be difficult to stop, because there is a grand trine there is this grand trine in water. But when I say difficult to stop, I don't mean that in a bad sense. Once you're doing something that feels good, you can carry on with it. And also, Cancerians have a good sense of self-preservation, so I don't think that you're going to be getting yourself into any trouble there. I think you'll just be able to make the most of it all, and you'll find that there should be a relatively high level of support, if that's what you need. I mean, the moon is making not just a trine to Saturn, but it's making a trine to Venus. So you get the support you need. If there's something you don't understand, then you can always ask, and I think that you'll get a fairly immediate response. And probably the most useful aspect is a trine between the moon and Mars. So Mars is in Cancer, and so Mars has been in Cancer for some time, and I think it stays in Cancer, and for a couple more months. And so with Mars in Cancer, you're able to assert yourself, and you have a strong sense of who you are, a strong sense of identity. Moon makes a trine to that Mars, and so there may even be a feeling that you are just in the right place, that there's nowhere else you'd like to be, that you don't have to struggle, you don't have to move unless you want to move. There could be some pressure. I mean, the moon does make an opposition to Uranus, and so that moon opposition Uranus could be about an attempt to knock you off your course, but I think it's going to be a fairly half-hearted attempt. Sometimes people try it on, or organizations can try it on. They try to get your attention. They try to get you to do something that you don't want to do. They may even sort of, deliberately try to upset you. It's like those nuisance phone calls that tell you that the IRS is about to raid your house, or that someone has just used your credit card. Those kind of robocalls. Are they robocalls? Or you're talking to someone, often talking to someone on the other side of the planet. But the idea is to make you panic. And with moon opposition Uranus, there could be that kind of irritation. But I don't think it's going to be anything you take particularly seriously. And you will be very good at defending yourself with moon trine Mars. You will completely understand your boundaries, and you will understand, the moment anyone tries to infringe those boundaries, you'll be able to respond quickly. I mean, it's not just the fact that the moon is trine Mars. The moon is also sextile Mercury, and with that moon sextile Mercury, you have a certain facility with words. Cancerians often do have a great facility with words. I mean, Hemingway, he was a Cancerian, wasn't he? A lot of writers are Cancerians, and So you know how to put words together, and you know how to really make your impression, make your feelings clear. And so if anyone is behaving in a way that is untoward, you can put them in their place really very quickly. And I don't think there's going to be any serious opposition. So, that's another reason to think that Cancer, of all the 12 signs, is really one of the strongest, at least today. Because because you are strong in yourself, and you know how to look after yourself, and you also know how to enjoy yourself. So kind of everything is working, and yeah, there are going to be a few distractions, a few attempts to knock you off your path, but I don't think those attempts will be successful. Leo, you still don't really want to do much. I mean, this is the kind of the last day of it. Tomorrow the moon moves into Sagittarius, and that is something very different. But while the moon is in Scorpio, I just feel that you don't really want to push yourself. You're happiest when you're doing things in your own way, at your own pace. And just a reminder that Leo is of course a fixed sign, and you don't want too much change, you don't want too much variety, especially now. And you are aware that there's a lot of stuff going on around you, but I don't think that you really want to get involved. And it just might be the case that you're in a situation where you just want to prepare the ground. Understand, not just understand what's going on, but also understand what is possible. And that might be something you're really thinking about. You're thinking about what you would like to do in the future, and what future constraints might be, and you really want to understand it all and really get to grips with it. But if you see something that doesn't fit, that seems wrong, then you'll have no difficulty expressing yourself and telling people, for example, that they may be doing something that is illegal. That there might be that sense of it. You, as a representative of, not necessarily of the government, but you understand the government at the moment. You understand power structures, and because you understand power structures, you're able to get an idea of what's possible and what's not, maybe what's legal, what's not legal. And so if you need to show authority or to tell people about authority, then now would be a very good time to do it. And what you're doing, to an extent, is you are maintaining the status quo. Now that sounds a little bit boring, maintaining the status quo. We're looking for change, we're looking for variety. You don't want to just maintain the status quo, but sometimes it's the right thing to do. It's not a time for new adventures, for doing things that are super exciting, at least not in the Leo world. You understand the constraints, and because you understand the constraints, you're not going to do anything stupid, and your main concern is just building yourself up and making sure that you are as secure as possible. And from a vantage point of your own secure position, you understand a lot of things. There is a grand trine in water signs, And, because the moon is in Scorpio and it's trine Mars and it's trine Venus. And, this grand trine in water signs is of course, very emotional. And it's probably too emotional for your liking. But if you just stay in one place, you can pick up on this energy. You can start to get some idea of people's emotions, even why they're being so emotional. And it just might be a time when you can just watch it, observe it. And I think, with the sun being in Aquarius, Sun, your ruler, being in Aquarius, which can be quite a detached sign. You don't have to be part of it, and you can just take notes and prepare for the next move, whatever it might be. But I don't think you have to make any moves today. I just don't think you'll really be in the mood. Now, one aspect that I probably need to mention is a sextile between Mars and Uranus. Now, this Mars sextile Uranus is if you like, the headline aspect for today. It's probably the most important aspect, and I think it's going to affect all of us, but in different ways. But for you, Mars sextile Uranus might relate to your feelings about the immediate future and your awareness. When I say immediate, I'm probably talking about days, a couple of weeks. Your awareness that there is certainly something you can do to create real change. And it may be about what you want to achieve. Could be about career, it could be about your social aims. And this Mars sextile Uranus is about you understanding that when things have settled down, you're going to be able to make things happen in a big way. But you're not ready, I don't think, to take the initiative quite yet. And so in that sense, Leo, the Mars sextile Uranus is just a reminder of what you can do. It could also be about quiet preparation. Uranus in Taurus is about your ambition, what you'd really like to do, and what you'd really like to change. It's quite revolutionary, Uranus in Taurus, in terms of breaking down existing structures, coming up with something new. And Mars is the way you do it. Mars is sextile Uranus, but Mars is not strong enough to actually see it through. And it's just about understanding the possibilities of your own power and perhaps making some preparations. Virgo, you do have a lot to say, like yesterday, and the words will come quickly. There won't be much resistance. And part of that is connected with the fact that Mercury is still opposition Mars. And Mercury opposition Mars creates agitation, but it's a very dynamic aspect, Mercury opposition Mars. And this might mean that you feel you really have to assert yourself verbally, whether it's through the spoken word or the written word. You feel that something has to be said, something you've noticed, and you have to put it right. And that means people have to understand what you're thinking and what you're planning. And you then have to consider exactly what you say. Mercury opposition Mars can be a somewhat dangerous aspect. It can be just too tense, and it can just say too much, and the words might not actually come out right. You might feel that you're being reasonable, but when you actually say something, the words could actually be quite hurtful with Mercury opposition Mars. So, don't just say the first thing that comes to mind. Give yourself a chance to sort of understand what is happening. But Mercury is making a trine to Uranus, and that Mercury trine Uranus does indicate to me that you really can change things by what you say and what you write. So everything has a consequence. So don't say something, don't send a text message, don't send an email unless you've thought it through. Ask yourself, what impact do you expect it to have? And be realistic and just consider the possibility that it might have quite a big impact. And if you don't want to have an impact, then don't say anything. But I think, Virgo, there are things that you really do want to say. You feel that it's important, and that Mercury trine Uranus means that there's absolutely no excuse for feeling powerless. It's actually a day when you are very powerful, when you really can have an impact. And then, Virgo, consider what's important. Where would you like to have an impact? And so make your choices. Now, with that Mercury opposition Mars, there is, of course, some danger that you involve yourself in too much. Mercury Mars can be in a state of permanent tension, just moving from place to place, idea to idea, and it feels as if it's a lot of activity, but there might be so much activity, so much variety, so much tension that actually nothing gets done. And that means, Virgo, it's going to be important that you have some kind of focus. You decide where you want to have an impact, what you want to control, who do you want to have an influence, and who do you want to have an influence on, and then really focus on that one thing. And also, don't spread your resources too thinly. I think there's some danger of that, and it's not just by what you say. It may actually be where you go to. It may be that you go too many places. I don't know what you feel like at the moment, but some Virgos might find themselves involved in some fairly incessant short distance traveling, and you go from one place to another, and you spend too much time on it, and you get nowhere. And that means, Virgo, that from a geographical, locational perspective, decide where you want to be and where you want to go, and don't go to too many places. So if you've got a lot of engagements, appointments lined up, maybe you should cut back, because you want to make the most of what you've got. And I think it would be a shame, Virgo, if you spread yourself too thinly, because if you're able to really concentrate on the things that matter, I think it can actually be a very good day. In fact, I think it can be quite a powerful day. But don't feel that you have to think beyond yourself. It's about getting results. It's not about some huge vision. You might actually be disappointed by some people's lack of vision. It just may be that they don't have the kind of imagination that you have. And that is a good reason why you need to be focused and consider things in terms of what you want to achieve in a short-term sense. Think about those results. And you need to build it up in a slow, methodical way, and just remember that people might not understand what you're trying to do, because I don't think they have much vision, and they can't really see much beyond tomorrow, and a lot of people just want to just keep it simple and not go beyond the current situation. So other people can be used, you can make an impression, but you can't expect people to go beyond the moment. I don't think they have the vision or the imagination. Libra, I don't think that you should discount financial issues. The moon does continue moving through Scorpio and makes a trine to Venus, and with that aspect, I think you should understand the importance of money, and you do seem to have a certain facility in terms of financial matters. Now, when we talk about facility, I'm talking about an ease, and that's because we've got a grand trine. We've got the moon in Scorpio, it's trine Mars, it's trine Venus, it's trine Saturn. So with that grand trine energy, with a financial link, suggests, things could be easy. But is that a good or a bad thing? If things are easy, if things are running smoothly, and we're talking about money, then you could say that it's actually easy to spend money. It just happens. And so in terms of expenditure, do be aware of that. You might just lose touch with things a little bit. One thing moves into another, one demand after another, something that needs to be bought. You're maybe not questioning financial inputs critically, and you're just responding in a way that just feels right in a sort of vague sense. So, there is a possibility with this facility that you spend money without thinking. I mean, it doesn't have to be disastrous, but there are maybe a few things that get bought that don't have to be bought. That's one way of looking at it, looking at things from a most negative perspective. But this grand trine can also work in your favor, especially as Saturn is involved. So you could say that Saturn is a controlling influence, some sense of responsibility, and if you make the effort, you can actually understand, what's happening financially on an emotional level as well as an intellectual level. You can just get a feel for it all, and that can actually help you. So it's possible that you spend money without thinking. It could also be that you just get yourself involved in a situation which could be financially profitable, or there's a financial opportunity just comes your way. And if you're prepared to sort of deal with financial issues in a sort of no-nonsense kind of way, and you just resist the temptation to overspend, in fact, it can be a time when you can really get to grips with your finances. So from a financial point of view, it's a day that could work in two ways. And if you make some effort to control yourself and to focus on good management, then I think financially it actually can be a very good day. And then you have to consider other people. Mars is quite emphasized today because we've got Mercury opposition Mars, and we've got Mars sextile Uranus, and Mars could represent another person. And if Mars does represent another person, then it might be someone who is quite hasty. They could be accident prone. They could say things and do things without warning. And this means that you possibly have to be a bit wary of certain people, especially if they've got a track record of being unreliable or unstable, because that Mars sextile Uranus, might encourage them to do something or suggest something that is not necessarily advisable. But that Mars sextile Uranus, I don't want to be overly negative about it. Mars sextile Uranus can be surprising, but it can be surprising in a good way. You might find that people are ready to do things sort of out of the blue that could actually work in your favor. And so perhaps you need to choose your friends carefully, because Mars is other people, but sometimes Mars can be someone really close to you who you can't avoid. And so in terms of relationships, monitor your partner's behavior. Are they behaving in a cool and calm and stable way, or are they doing something unexpected, or are they saying things unexpected? Mercury opposition Mars. People can talk without thinking. People can almost get angry without thinking. And whatever the situation, whether it's a close relationship or someone you hardly know, don't take what they say too seriously. People are going to be quick to express their emotions through their words. And the words might sound quite disturbing. They might sound dramatic, but that's just an impression. And I think if you just leave it for a couple of days and let the words settle, you'll start to realize that it wasn't such a big thing, that it's not really worth getting excited or distressed about. And returning to the material side of things, from the view of your work, if you are working, then it might actually be quite a productive day because of this grand trine. There's a grand trine, Moon trine Mars, Moon trine Venus. In fact, the Moon is kind of bringing Venus and Mars together, and that grand trine could be useful in terms of your work and just understanding things, understanding the people you have to work with. You just get it. And there is a financial dimension to it, but it's not just about money. It's just about you realizing what is happening and being in a position where you just get it. And so if you feel something needs to be done of a career nature, then I think your feelings are almost certainly correct. And in the process, you might be helped by another person because of that grand trine. Moon making the trine to Venus, making the trine to Mars. And I want to just quickly return to relationships. I was kind of talking about existing relationships, but new relationships are possible because of that grand trine. So we can see, the Moon makes a trine to Venus, then makes a trine to Mars. The Moon would represent a unifying force which brings you and another person together for whatever reason. And it just might be that there is a common concern, common problem, something that you and someone else have something to talk about. And because you've got something in common, that can bring you closer. And in general today, Libra, it's actually a very good time for making new and fortunate contacts. Scorpio. Mars is your ruler, and Mars is doing a lot. Mars is sextile Uranus. It's opposition Mercury. And this means that you're really in the center of things. And of course, we've also got the moon moving through Scorpio, which is your sign. So, what are you going to do? What are you planning on doing today? Because today does actually look very dynamic, and you can certainly make an impact. And it's therefore, not a good time to just, be staying in bed or ignoring the world, because you can make an impression, and it would be a shame if you didn't take advantage of all these opportunities that I think will be around. Yet, that Mars sextile Uranus can be a little bit troublesome, so don't overdo it. You need to get the balance right. Yeah, there are things you can do. There are things you can say which will be very powerful and will help move you forward and give you a great sense of satisfaction. But if you take things too far, then, okay, you might get yourself into trouble. But I do think that's unnecessary. And perhaps it relates to your motives. If you are motivated by any sense of resentment or anger, or if you're annoyed by people, well, that's not a good place to start. And those kind of negative feelings should probably be put to one side. Instead, you should be focusing on, what is possible. That's what matters. And if you take a fairly adventurous approach, then that's the way to go. And Scorpios can be as adventurous as anyone. And this grand trine, just involves some really nice sectors of your chart. You've got Moon in Scorpio, and Venus is in Pisces. Pisces in a Scorpio chart is a very creative sector, and then you've got Mars in Cancer. Mars in Cancer is about new horizons, putting effort into finding new horizons. I mean, they might have a sort of a spiritual nature, or just something to give yourself a broader view. And that means that as far as possible, Scorpio, you should not be too bothered by the past. I mean, the past is always important, and Moon in Scorpio can be about memories and, yes, resentments, but that is not the best way to handle today's energies. I mean, you certainly have to be sensitive. You can use your experiences from the past to help guide your actions in the present and the future, but you don't want to be overwhelmed by the past, because if you do get too concerned about the past, that could bring things to a standstill. It is about movement. We don't want this to be about mud, because when you're thinking about water and Scorpio, you can think about mud. I mean, that's Scorpio. That's water in its worst sense, and there's no need to be stuck in the mud. And I suppose one way to avoid the mud is to sort of fly over it. If that is at all possible. I mean, I don't know whether people still use hovercrafts. Hovercrafts used to be a really big deal in the 60s. I remember when, my parents, when we'd travel, when we'd go abroad, go on holiday, it was very often the hovercraft. People don't seem to use hovercrafts anymore. I don't quite know why, but hovercraft can be about flying over the mud and not having to get down into it. Don't they have those kind of things in Florida, these things with propellers which fly over the Everglades? And not that I've ever been to Florida, but that's perhaps the image you should have. And with Mars in Cancer, Mars doesn't want to get caught. You don't want to stop, because if you stop and you try to work out what's happening then very quickly you get stuck. So constant action is probably the way forward. It doesn't have to be constant dramatic action. It doesn't have to be anything violent. Just constantly moving, and just seeing what is available. And I think you'll find that actually a lot is available today if you avail yourself of the various opportunities. And don't forget other people. Venus is moving to a trine of Mars. Now, that Venus trine Mars becomes exact at the end of a week, and Venus trine Mars is pretty good for relationships. It's a trine. It's about you and someone else just having a natural ease in each other's experience, in each other's presence. And then today, the moon is bringing that Venus-Mars trine into being a little bit early, because the moon makes a trine to Venus, makes a trine to Mars, got a grand trine. And so today, relationships can move forward quickly, and it doesn't matter what the nature of that relationship is. There's just a connection, and probably all that's required on your part is just to be sensitive and to be open-minded, to listen to what people say, and to just focus on what you and other people have in common. I mean, don't focus too much on the differences. So that is a way to look at, that is a way to use that grand trine. Relationships can form quickly, or at least can develop quickly. Of course, you've got to use a certain amount of judgment, but I wouldn't get too caught up in judgment and suspicion right now. Perhaps that can wait until a later date. Sagittarius. You are probably not entirely in the mood for being part of the day's events. I mean, I think that it is, in many respects, quite a busy day. There is a lot of action. But the question is, does this action really involve you, or do you want it to involve you? I think the answer is probably no. You have your own agenda, your own concerns, and you're quite well aware of what's happening, but it doesn't suit you. You kind of feel that the time isn't right. And it's true that the moon is still in Scorpio, and it's not in Sagittarius yet. Tomorrow the moon will be in Sagittarius, and that will represent something very different. The moon will be moving to Sagittarius. It will be sextile with Sun. It will be sextile with Pluto, and you'll be in a better position to be part of things. But right now, I don't think you really want to be part of things. But that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't be observing what's happening. I think that your ability to understand surrounding events is actually very good, and the fact that you're not part of it gives you objectivity, and it also gives you a certain amount of strength. Now, if you were to try to get involved with everything, if you were trying to be very sociable, trying to talk to people, you might still feel that something is missing. It might just feel that contacts with other people are just slow, and I think that means that your reservations about today and about engaging with today are probably justified when you actually put it to the test. People just don't seem to be on your wavelength, and when you look at them as individuals, it's like when you look at people as a group, it looks fine. It seems that there are interesting things going on. There seems to be some action that you might want to be part of. But as soon as you approach the group, as soon as you get involved with another person, as soon as you start talking to another person, you might feel a certain sense of disappointment, and things might just slow down, and that would potentially give you a negative impression. So Sagittarius, don't feel pressured. You don't have to rush into something that you don't want to be part of, and you should maybe let other people take center stage. And it may be a case of letting other people make fools of themselves. I mean, they might make fools of themselves. They might do something exciting, but look at Mercury. Mercury is ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. I mean, Mercury is powerfully aspected today. Mercury makes a opposition to Mars. It makes a trine to Uranus. It's the other person who has the energy. It's the other person who wants to take the risks, and they take the risks. I mean, I don't think that we're not talking about risks to life and limb or anything like that. It's more risks of making fools of themselves, more in that sense. And so let people do their thing. Let people get all the attention. It may work for them. It might not work for them. But I don't think you yourself have to particularly worry about it. You can instead just watch from a distance, and I think right now that is the best place to be. Capricorn, there is a fair amount of action today. With Mercury is moving through your sign. Mercury is opposition Mars. Mercury is also trine Uranus, and this action is something that could, I think, work in your favor. I think that you just need to make sure that you exercise a certain amount of control, as I think that you're able to do, but don't be tied by fixed ways of looking at the world. So you can exercise control, but you don't want to exercise so much control that you spoil things, or your approach might be just a little bit too rigid, and that's absolutely not what you want. And you need to be very aware that different people have different ideas, and we do have Mercury making an opposition to Mars, and this Mercury opposition Mars could represent some kind of disagreement. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you had Mercury was opposition Mars yesterday, and I don't know what yesterday was like, but Mercury opposition Mars is stronger today than it was yesterday, and the things people do, the things people say might not meet your approval, but that doesn't mean to say that you're right and they're wrong. Sometimes you can just be a little bit too limited in your outlook, and you don't consider alternative possibilities. And with Mercury making a trine to Uranus, that seems to me to be an invitation to do things differently and to consider alternatives. You might think that things can be done one way, and that indeed there's only one way of doing something, but Mercury trine Uranus can suggest something very different, and it may be other people suggesting it. And so if you hear something that you're not comfortable with, but doesn't make sense, don't immediately rush to judgment. You have to give people an opportunity to explain themselves and to perhaps work through your criticisms. I mean, it's not a day for making a lot of criticism, by the way. I mean, I think you're quite capable of being critical with this Mercury opposition Mars, but I would suggest that you keep some of your thoughts to yourself. And fundamentally, it's about not spoiling the day. Today there is a grand trine in water signs. We've got Moon in Scorpio, trine Venus, trine Mars, and that grand trine is in fortunate houses in your chart. And so this grand trine can really help you. It can help move things along, and it can sort of break down rigid structures and use your feelings. And don't be afraid of socializing. The moon is in Scorpio, and from a Capricorn view, that moon in Scorpio can be very sociable, especially when the moon is trine Venus and it's also trine Mars. So once you're with people, you might have your reservations, but once you are with people, things can move quickly, and there can be new possibilities, and you might realize that you've underestimated someone, or perhaps you've been in the past a little bit narrow-minded. I mean, I'm not saying that you're a narrow-minded person, but in certain areas you might have thought that there's only one way of doing things, when there might have been several ways of doing things. And once you get into the swing of things, there could actually be some kind of transformation. In fact, Capricorn, you're quite capable of being happy, optimistic, even the life and soul of the party, believe it or not. Just don't ask too many questions, and try to think about things in the best possible light. You might have your private doubts, but try to be as just optimistic as possible. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you indulge in fantasy. I mean, fantasy is not something that Capricorns should overindulge in. But if you can be optimistic and you can respond in an optimistic way to what other people are saying and suggesting, then that might be the best way of using the day's energies. So Capricorn, I think actually it can be a fun, exciting day when there are lots of things going on and you can really benefit from other people's company. But to an extent, it's up to you. You have to be positive, optimistic, and really think the best. Think that of all possibilities, the best of those possibilities can come about. Aquarius, you can certainly have an impact today, and I do think that you want to have an impact. You know that there are things that you want to do, that you want to achieve, and you're not prepared to just sort of be a passenger. You want to be part of it, and I think you very much can be part of it. But don't feel that everything has to be entirely on your own terms. Make use of the fact that there is a grand trine today. Moon is in Scorpio. It's trine Venus. It's trine Mars. This grand trine can work in your best interests, and it could actually work in your material best interests. What do you want in terms of money, organization? It might have some relationship to your work and your ambitions. What do you want? I mean, I'm not saying that you can sort everything out today, but I think you can sort a lot out today. And don't be shy about who you are and what you want. And also, if you possibly can, try to show a little bit of sensitivity, with that moon in Scorpio, especially when you're with other people. You might not feel you want to show sensitivity, but if you can just listen to your feelings and kind of listen to the feelings of other people, then a lot of things are going to start making sense, and you can actually begin a process that suddenly just takes on a life of its own, and it's something very fortunate. So if you start the day feeling that things are a little bit stuck, that things aren't moving, you can actually make them move. And once the grand trine gets going, it just keeps moving, and you make an increasing amount of progress. And also, as I was saying to Capricorn, you can be, very positive, very optimistic. It's about Saturn and what Saturn is doing, because you and Capricorn, you share the same. You share the same ruling planet. Saturn rules both Capricorn and Aquarius, and you can become part of that optimism. Once things start moving, that gives you an indication that you really are on the right track, and it's like a virtuous circle. So wait for that fortunate feedback. Once you've got that feedback, that will encourage you to move to the next stage. And so Capricorn, so Aquarius, it's just a day when things can be really useful, and you can make things happen. But the day's emphasis is possibly not on just having a good time for the sake of it. No, I think it's actually more about getting results on your own terms and asking yourself, what do you need to get what you want? I mean, part of what you need in many cases will be getting other people's support and encouraging people to make the most of what they've got. That's part of it. But it is about results, and I think that through your own abilities and through other people's willingness to listen to you and accept you, you can really achieve quite a lot, Aquarius. So, it's a day when you really need to make the most of things, and don't be put off by the odd setback. I'm not even saying there is going to be a setback, but if there is a setback, you've got what it takes to get round it, to solve the problem. And part of it is just going to be a very positive, optimistic attitude, which can really see you through and make sure that whatever you're engaged in, it can eventually have a successful conclusion. Pisces, from an astrological viewpoint, probably the main thing going on is a grand trine in water signs, because we've got Moon in Scorpio, we've got Venus in Pisces, we've got Mars in Cancer. So, there's a lot of water around, and that does mean that you feel comfortable. You feel that you are in your element. But don't be too reliant on any one person. It's just possible that not everyone is in a positive frame of mind. Some people just have their doubts, they want to stay exactly where they are, and they're just not going to listen. And you shouldn't judge the world by one person's reaction. So this means that you need, as far as possible, to have a lot of variety, where there are different things going on, different possibilities. So, if one thing doesn't work, then you move on to something else. You can be like the water. The water just keeps flowing. So, with this grand trine in water, there is constant emotional movement, and you're not going to get stuck on a single setback. I mean, I suppose you could. Moon is in Scorpio. Sometimes the Moon in Scorpio can be a little bit negative, but you just got to move beyond it and find the people who are on your wavelength. And once you find what you're looking for, things really should happen. Things really should move, and you can also stabilize things. And that is because the Moon is making a trine to Saturn, and then of course it makes a trine to Venus. So you can be a stabilizing influence, but not someone who is bringing things to a halt. That's not what it's about. It's about taking the energy around you and, really making the most of it. And there's something about the way you present yourself that is very charming and charismatic. And part of this is because you've got Venus in Pisces. It's still moving through your sign. It's no longer making that conjunction to Saturn, and it was over the weekend that we had that Venus Saturn conjunction. But that's not a problem anymore. And the Moon is making a trine to Venus, so that just allows you to relate to people without being overly analytical, and just things do come together nicely. And I also think that the people you're going to get on best with today are probably people who you don't necessarily know very well, and they may be in their own ways quite different from you in terms of their experiences and their background. And social variety might actually be what you really need, because if you hang around with the same old people, well, you might actually be disappointed. The kind of people who are negative, who don't want to move, who aren't prepared to consider new possibilities, probably the kind of people you might already know very well. But if you reach out to people that are different from yourself, then I think the results could be very fortunate, and you might just see things in a new and quite enlightening way. So that's it, Pisces. I think it can be a very good day, but I think it is important to choose your company carefully. Not everyone is on your wavelength, but you're a Pisces. You're able to make these choices. So go for people you feel comfortable with, but by comfortable, I mean people who seem to be offering something that you don't necessarily have, and that's where comfort is at the moment. Comfort is not with things that are from the past, but things that are rooted in the past. The comfort is about knowing you're making progress and knowing that you are in some way expanding your horizons. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 45, gathering together. And this is quite an appropriate hexagram to have, given the astrological situation. We do have this grand trine in water signs today. Got the Moon in Scorpio, trining Venus and Mars. Things really are flowing, and that Venus and Mars is quite sociable. And also, if you're into midpoints, we have Venus on the Jupiter node midpoint, aspecting the Jupiter node midpoint today. So that does indicate that gathering together is the right approach, thinking that we don't have to do everything on our own, that other people can help, and we don't have to be caught up in our own ego, thinking that we can do everything ourselves and we want to get all the attention. If we want to be effective, and if we want to use our power effectively, then we have to be part of the group, and that requires perhaps a little bit of a sacrifice, certainly a sacrifice of our ego, but it's about pooling things together. And if that's what we can do with gathering together, then that would certainly be the best approach. And we do have a moving line. The second line from the bottom moves, and it is a similar message. Being part of something. It also, we get the sense of a sacrifice, which I'm not quite sure what it means, but the I Ching talks about two kinds of sacrifice: the sacrifice of the spring and the sacrifice of the summer. And the indication is that when one makes a sacrifice in the spring, it doesn't have to be as good as the sacrifice in the summer, because in the spring, I mean, I suppose, is it spring now? January? Feels pretty cold. It's not quite spring, but there's not so much available here in the spring. I suppose spring would be sort of March, April. So one's not able to give so much, but it's a good enough. So whatever we give, whatever we feel we contribute to the group, it is enough. We're contributing whatever we can do, and that is the way forward. So regardless of your situation, in terms of what you're trying to do, as far as possible, try to see yourself as part of a group, as joint action being sort of more successful than solo action. Of course, that does to an extent depend on your situation. I mean, if you're completely alone, what does that mean? Well, there might be ways to connect with people online, and you need to consider, just the people around you, perhaps people you don't talk to, they can become part of something larger than yourself. So do consider that possibility. Now, we do have a moving line. As I said, the second line moves, and the second line moves to hexagram 47, which is oppression. Now, at first sight, that might seem rather a disappointment. Gathering together seemed great, and then you've just gone to oppression. That's not good, is it? Well, how does one see oppression? Oppression just sounds as if one can't do anything. One perhaps feels overwhelmed by everyone around us. Perhaps our individuality is not being appreciated. But that's one way of looking at it. Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching, he did not call this hexagram oppression. He calls it burdened. And I think that burdened is probably a better way of looking at it. And burdened is about having a lot of responsibilities. And Winkup talks about the official at court who is burdened because he has a lot of things to deal with. Perhaps the ruler isn't particularly competent, but we've taken a lot on ourselves. But we will be successful. So it may be that in terms of the group gathering together, it was the right thing to do, but we have taken on a lot of responsibility. And that might say something about the sacrifices I was talking about, the sacrifice of the spring, and that may be the sacrifice of our time or offering to do something, and we perhaps regret it. Should we really have offered to do something? Should we have been so amenable? And now we've got a lot on our plate, and we might feel overwhelmed. But the I Ching is really telling us that we can see it through, especially if we take the Winkup approach, and we'd see this as not as being oppression, as just being about being burdened. And there is the assurance that we're not burdened in such a way that we're going to fail. We are actually going to succeed. So don't worry about taking on too much responsibility, even if in the short term it does seem a little bit overwhelming, because there is a suggestion here that in the end there will be a successful outcome. And now it's time to look at the Mars-Uranus sextile, which is today. And let's start off by looking at the chart of this the chart of this sextile. So here's the sextile. Mars sextile Uranus, January the 23rd, today, 2025. As far as I can see, it happens at 3:09 p.m. London time. So that would be in the afternoon in the Americas. Sorry, no, not the afternoon. That would be in the morning in the Americas. And there is this sextile between Uranus and Mars. So how do we see this? Well, as far as events are concerned, we might be excited by the fact that Mars is sextile Uranus. Sextile is seen as being a good aspect, but it may just be an aspect. It just may be a connection between Mars and Uranus. They come together easily. There's a little bit of effort because it's a sextile rather than a trine. And Mars sextile Uranus as a pairing can be quite explosive. It can be about drama. It can be about change. It can be about revolution. About things happening unexpectedly. And so there is a downside. I mean, what would be the positive way of seeing Mars sextile Uranus? I think one can perceive of Mars sextile Uranus in a positive way, perhaps more in terms of the individual. So a person who has Mars sextile Uranus might find it very easy to assert themselves, to effective use of power. They might have an interest in guns, though. Mars sextile Uranus. Mars sextile Uranus is about guns. I mean, Uranus is explosive. Mars is a quite sort of combative energy. You put those two planets together, yeah, you could have an interest in guns. It could be about fire. So I suppose someone who is a firefighter might have Mars sextile Uranus. Someone who works with guns for a living. Someone who is a soldier. These are things one can associate with Mars sextile Uranus, or just someone who is just generally very dynamic. But in terms of today and this Mars sextile Uranus and how it might affect the planet, I would be inclined to see it more in a negative sense than a positive sense. And it's not just the fact that we've got this Mars sextile Uranus. We have to look at the overall chart and look at Mercury. We've got Mercury today opposition Mars and trine Uranus. So Mercury is kind of acting as a trigger to that Mars-Uranus sextile. So it becomes explosive. It could be explosive communications, or it may not even be about communication. Mercury is just a detonator, and it could detonate the full potential of that Mars-Uranus. You can see the power of that Mars-Uranus more if you look at it from the view of say the sixth harmonic, because there's a lot of sextiles today so a sixth harmonic is when you take the absolute longitude of every planet, you multiply by 6, and then you successively subtract 360. I'm sorry if that sounds a bit obscure, but harmonics. I don't know how much harmonics are used in astrology at the moment. I think they've had a certain renaissance. But if we look at the sixth harmonic chart and look at the sixness of this horoscope, and we multiply everything by 6, let's just have a look at this chart. So let's see what the sixth harmonic looks like. So here is the sixth harmonic chart, and so by definition, when you've got a sixth harmonic chart, you have got Mars. You've got Mars conjunct Uranus, but also you've got Moon, Mars, and Uranus. So the Moon is so a conjunction in a sixth harmonic will be a conjunction, a trine, or a sextile. But again, I don't want to get into too many details about harmonics, but that Moon, Mars, Uranus are really together, and I think that is maybe slightly disturbing. It does suggest a lot of energy, and it could also represent bad actors. So if someone wants to create chaos, create explosions, destroying things, that Moon Mars Uranus conjunction in the sixth harmonic may be something that we really do need to take note of. So I think that's certainly an interesting chart, and yeah, I would have said maybe somewhat disturbing. And an alternative way of looking at that chart is to look at what one might look at the 30-degree dial. So if we set up the 30-degree dial, the 30-degree dial is the 12th harmonic. And so what the 30-degree dial is you remove the signs from every single planet. So what you do is you take out the signs, you forget about the signs, and you just have a dial for 30 degrees. So if something is so the sun at 3 degrees 52 Aquarius, you just say 3 degrees 52. So you put the sun at 3 degrees 52 on the chart. Jupiter at 1131. So you forget the Gemini, you just put 1131 on it. So let's look at that dial. That's what happened there. Okay. There's a dial, and we will have a 30-degree dial, and so on the 30-degree dial, again, we can see that Moon, Mars, and Uranus are really together. It's just giving us information that we already had in the 60-degree dial. So that's just an alternative way of looking at it, and you get a lot of midpoints, and but I mean, I think the point is that Mars, Uranus, and the Moon are together, and Mars, Uranus. It doesn't matter whether it's a sextile. The point is, it can be a dramatic energy, and yeah, I think it could represent a bit of danger. And what I wanted to look at was a few historical events where Mars was sextile Uranus. And the first of these events was an event that happened quite recently, and it was the self-immolation of, I think he was a man called Max Azzarello, and he self-immolated in New York at the time in April. He set himself on fire. I think he died, and it was around the time of Trump. I think it was the beginning of Trump's trial, one of his trials in New York. And this is a chart for when this man decided to set himself on fire. And there was Mars at 21 Pisces and 2145, and Uranus at 2145. So unfortunately, that was a very Mars sextile Uranus event. It was, you could say, easy for him to set himself on fire. He covered himself in some flammable fluid and set himself on fire. It was easy. Mars sextile Uranus. He didn't have any opposition. Everyone saw it. It hit the news. He died. So that's perhaps a reminder that Mars sextile Uranus is not always a positive event. Now, some years ago, in the early 80s, there was the sinking of the Belgrano. So the Belgrano, this happened during the Falklands War, when the Belgrano was sunk by a British submarine, and I think it was may have been the first time that a submarine had sunk a ship with a torpedo since the Second World War. I mean, maybe there was something going on in the 1971 war between India and Pakistan, but I think it might have been the first time. And obviously, it was very straightforward. A ship, nuclear submarine, fired a torpedo, it sank, and it sank very quickly, I think. And Mars, there's Mars, and there's Uranus. Now, this Mars-Uranus sextile was not exact at the time of the sinking of the Belgrano, but Mars was pretty close to the Aries point. opposition 0 degrees Aries. So Mars on the Aries point represents a violent event that catches the world's attention. And Mars sextile Uranus, the sinking of a Belgrano, was certainly a big event. I remember the famous headline in the British newspapers, the Sun tabloid newspaper had its headline, "Gotcha," showing delight at the fact that Britain had sunk an Argentine ship. Of course, that's kind of neglects the suffering of the people on board, but it was certainly a global event, the sinking of a Belgrano. And a couple of years later, there was another tragedy, an even bigger tragedy, which took place with a Mars sextile Uranus, and that was Bhopal. So Bhopal was a chemical plant in the Indian city of Bhopal, run by the American company Union Carbide, and it had this chemical called methyl isocyanate. I think that was the name of the chemical. And there was an accident at the plant, and it happened, you can see it happened in the sort of middle of the night, and this whole city got covered with a cloud of cyanide gas, or methyl isocyanate, and a lot of people were maimed, killed, I think blinded, and it was an absolutely catastrophic event. And at the time of the accident, Mars was at 12 degrees 52 Aquarius, and Uranus was at 1337 Sagittarius, fairly close to the IC, but there was a Mars sextile Uranus aspect, and this does give us further indication that Mars sextile Uranus can represent bad things, explosive things, a lot of people dying, and Moon was conjunct true black moon Lilith as well, and an accident that I don't think anyone died in, but was still quite dramatic for Denmark, was the Borsen fire. So this was a building in Copenhagen, a historic building in Copenhagen. I think it was the old Bors in Copenhagen, and this was less than a year ago. And the Borsen fire had Mars sextile Uranus. I mean, again, not an exact Mars sextile Uranus, but it does demonstrate the kind of things you might expect when Mars is sextile Uranus. Now, as it was not exact, it's very easy for me to focus on exact aspects because, you think today Mars is exactly sextile Uranus. But of course there is an orb. So a couple of days either side of the event, you're in, if you like, in a sort of danger zone. And one final disaster, which didn't actually kill anyone directly, but people probably died of cancer. Some people died of cancer later. Was the Windscale fire. So the Windscale fire was an accident in October the 10th, 1957, in a nuclear power station in northwest England, and this fire, Windscale. The name Windscale had such a bad reputation that they just in the end decided to change the name to Sellafield. But so this nuclear power station caught fire, and there was a lot of there was a chimney. I think it was used air cooling. I'm not quite sure on the details, but they didn't install the filters or the scrubbers to stop nuclear particles going out, and so there was a plume of nuclear particles coming out of a Windscale fire, and these things overheated. And at the time of a Windscale fire, Mars was pretty close to a sextile of Uranus. I don't know about the precise time of it. It was very difficult to work out the time when the pile caught fire. The nuclear pile caught fire, but anyway, there was Mars sextile Uranus. And then, very quickly, a few people with Mars sextile Uranus. I don't want to spend long on this. The worst example of Mars sextile Uranus is the horoscope of Adam Lanza. So Adam Lanza was the person who perpetrated the Sandy Hook massacre, this sort of elementary school in Connecticut in 2012, where he went into this school and killed many children and teachers and so forth. It was a really horrific event, and Mars, at the time of the massacre, Mars was at 1949 Pisces, and Uranus was at 1801 Capricorn. So a Mars sextile Uranus event. I mean, I'm not really saying that this is what Mars sextile Uranus is all about. It just may be a coincidence. But again, a reminder that really bad things can happen with Mars sextile Uranus. And if you have Mars sextile Uranus, if you have Mars sextile Uranus in your chart, so this of course, just a reminder, this is not for the massacre; it's for the perpetrator, Adam Lanza, and I don't have a time of birth for his chart. I mean, ignore the houses; the houses shouldn't be there. So Mars sextile Uranus can be an interest in guns, and it can be, in the end, an interest in killing people and using these guns. That could be a potential manifestation. Someone who's recently been in the news is Bashar Assad, the former president of Syria, and Bashar Assad had Mars sextile Uranus. I wonder if that Mars sextile Uranus was kind of imposed upon him. I don't think that Bashar Assad really wanted to be president of Syria. It was just because his brother died and he would have preferred to just be an eye doctor in London. That's what he really wanted to be, I think. But circumstances pushed him into Syrian politics, and Mars sextile Uranus is the events he attracted, the civil war, and of course in the end he was forced to flee to Moscow. So perhaps if you've got Mars sextile Uranus in your chart, you may get involved in things you don't want to get involved in. So you could argue with his Mars sextile Uranus that he kind of knew he had Mars sextile Uranus. I mean, not literally, but on an unconscious level. And he tried his best to avoid it. But he was sucked in. So if you have Mars sextile Uranus and you don't feel you're using your Mars sextile Uranus, perhaps you should do something constructive of a Mars sextile Uranus nature, so that in that way the universe isn't going to say, oh, well, that person's not using a Mars sextile Uranus, so we'll do something. We'll throw him into the middle of Syrian politics. We'll make him president of Syria. We'll put him in a disaster situation. So, if you've got Mars sextile Uranus, do make sure that you are actually using it. Brigitte Macron, Emmanuel Macron's wife, has Mars sextile Uranus. I mean, Mars is a male planet, so it is possible with her Mars sextile Uranus that she's in a way projecting it, maybe onto her husband or onto men in general, though her Mars sextile Uranus is not exact, and there is this question about what kind of orb you should use for Mars sextile Uranus. Don't use a dramatically wide orb like 6 degrees. I would have said 4-degree orb, absolute maximum, but you could argue, because the sextile is a relatively minor aspect, perhaps you should use only 2 degrees. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy, again, don't have a time of birth for him. He has Mars sextile Uranus, and I think in his case it could be about what he says. Of course, he's getting into trouble for being hugely critical of Donald Trump in recent years, and now it's coming back to haunt him. And for someone who is Foreign Secretary, having Mars sextile Uranus is somewhat dangerous, because that's saying something about British foreign policy. Having David Lammy as British Foreign Secretary is encouraging Britain to get involved in situations that it maybe can't handle. Remembering that Keir Starmer has just flown to Ukraine and had some 100-year cooperation deal with the country, and Keir Starmer is still absolutely adamant that he's going to support Ukraine through its war. And David Lammy is the Foreign Secretary, and I just think that with that Mars sextile Uranus that's possibly not an aspect one would want to have in one's foreign secretary, and particularly in dangerous times like we've got now. And on the Russian side, Dmitry Medvedev has Mars sextile Uranus. So Dmitry Medvedev, he used to be president of Russia, so he would alternate for a time between Putin and him and Putin. One would become prime minister, one would be president, but he's not president or prime minister at the moment. But he's still an influential person in Russia, and I get the impression that in terms of him and Putin, it's a bit like sort of good cop, bad cop. I mean, Putin, regardless of what the West says, Putin, tries to be reasonable. I mean, as far as I can see, at least from a Russian perspective, he, when he was, interviewed about, recently, asked what does he think the biggest mistake he ever made was, he saw it as with trusting the West, and as far as he was concerned, the West completely pulled the wool over Russia's eyes during the Minsk agreements, and so he's the reasonable one. He's the one who wanted to go slowly with its war in Ukraine. I mean, you might not think that in terms of the Western press, but there are other people in Russia who who are kind of frustrated at the slow pace of a war and really regret that Putin didn't put more into the war at an early stage. And one person who was incredibly combative is now Dmitry Medvedev. People thought he was a sort of pro-Western leader. The Westerners thought they could do business with him, but now he's just turned into a real hawk. And Dmitry Medvedev, he has a Telegram channel, and he in his Telegram channel he says some really extreme stuff. He's saying, well, we shouldn't be just taking what we have. We should be getting more and more of Ukraine. He's pushing for a maximal outcome for Russia, as far as I can see. And Dmitry Medvedev has Mars-Uranus sextile. He's got Mars sextile Pluto, sextile Uranus. And so I think he's demonstrating that. He's Mars sextile Uranus. He's owning that Mars sextile Uranus in terms of advocating for a hawkish policy in terms of the Ukraine war. And so, then we have Paul McCartney. I'll finish up with Paul McCartney has Mars sextile Uranus. I think we have a time birth for Paul McCartney, and he has Mars in Leo sextile Uranus. And apparently Paul McCartney always has had a high sort of work ethic. Of all the Beatles, I think he was the one that really wanted to push things. So Mars sextile Uranus. This might be an example of Mars sextile Uranus being very constructive. Nothing too bad has happened in his. I mean, he's had tragedy in his life, but he hasn't been involved in accidents. He hasn't started wars. He's not into guns. Mars sextile Uranus, in his case, seems to have been quite benign. And Mars sextile Uranus, perhaps at its best, is someone who wants to do things differently, who has a lot of energy, and perhaps wants to be different, wants to be unusual, and does it in a constructive way. So I just wanted to finish with Paul McCartney to just illustrate the fact that Mars sextile Uranus isn't always a bad or an aggressive aspect to have, although I'm sure with Mars sextile Uranus he looked after his own interests, and if he felt those interests or feels those interests are undermined, he will take action, I would guess, with that Mars sextile Uranus. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say on Mars sextile Uranus. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would of course be incredibly grateful if you were to subscribe, provided of course that you enjoy the video. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.